Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Seniors Mental Health Supports webinar. My name is Susan Taylor, and I am the Deputy Minister of Seniors and Housing. And it is indeed my pleasure and honor to be here to introduce our Minister, Honourable Josephine Pon. Minister Pon was elected as MLA for Calgary-Beddington in April 2019. And appointed Minister of Seniors and Housing on April 30th, 2019. Her background and experience have given her personal insight into the current economic situation, especially the challenges that are being faced by everyday Albertans, including Alberta seniors. Minister Pon has spoken often of the impact of the pandemic on Alberta seniors and also of their great resilience. The Minister is very committed to supporting seniors to reconnect and to re-enter society post a pandemic. And this Seniors Mental Health webinar series is one tool to help seniors re-enter a post-pandemic world. And again, thank everybody for you joining this morning. I think we have over 40 attendees, and a special thank you to our panelists, which you will meet here soon. So Minister, on that note, my pleasure to turn it over to you for some opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much, the DM Taylor. Thank you for the kind introductions, as always. Well, welcome to the Senior Mentors webinar series. Well, I'm excited. It's finally here. We've been working on this for so long and so many months. And I just finished my another conference call with MLA Lovely, who is also working on this elder abuse with our stakeholder, and she just finished the 4 sessions, and I'm very impressed to learn how many people glad this government finally addressed this major issue, because this is not just one of the legislation. It's something that's related to us, to our parents and grandparents. As I mentioned, many people have experienced increasing stress and social isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic, but which has affected their mental health and wellness. 16 months has been a long 16 months for us. This is particularly true for seniors, caregivers, and staff in seniors organizations. Our community partner have told me that about all this issue, and I have been listening. That's why I'm pleased to offer this webinar series to support seniors, their caregiver, and staff as we being to recover from the pandemic and are we connected with each other. The 4-part of the series is focused on managing social isolations and getting help, reestablishing the social connections, dealing with grief and loss, and also managing burnout and stress. I hope these webinars will help to ease the people back into the normal life, which is we are so looking forward to, especially those who have experienced significant changes. We all have a role when it comes to supporting our own and each other's mentally, physically, and emotionally well-being. Now I will hand over to the mental health expert, or the DM Taylor. Everyone take care. Be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I will turn it over to one of our excellent facilitators, Kessa. Back to you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister and Minister Pon. And good morning, everyone. My name is Kessa Shikazi, and I'm the Executive Director with the Senior Strategic Planning Branch in Seniors and Housing. I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's session. All of us are beginning to transition to post-pandemic life. How do we manage social isolation, the fear of going into the community, and if necessary, accessing help? Today, we will address all of these issues. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Just for your awareness, these sessions are being recorded and will be posted on our website following the session today. There will be a question and answer period following the panel presentations. If you would like to pose questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And please note that if you prefer, there is an option to pose your questions anonymously. An information sheet with resource listings, including those mentioned today, will be available on our website, and the link is posted in the chat box. We will also be posting resources during the sessions. Today, we have 3 panelists joining us that bring a breadth of knowledge and experience on the topic of social isolation. David Grauweiler is the Executive Director of the Alberta Division of the Canadian Mental Health Association. David is a leader and advocate for the promotion of mental health in Alberta and establishing connections between organizations, governments, and agencies. Heather Rowland is the Community and Partnerships Coordinator for the Edmonton Southside Primary Care Network. Heather uses her knowledge and experience in the field of gerontology to advocate for social connectedness and the highest quality of life for older adults. And Heather Turowski is the project manager for the Rural Mental Health Project with the Canadian Mental Health Association. Jessica is a champion for systems thinking and social innovation and focuses on supporting collaborative and strategic approaches to mental wellness. More information on our panelists is available on our webpage. And I will start now with David. David, I will turn it over to you. Oh, David, you're just on mute.
Good morning, everybody. In the few short minutes that we have to share really important information, I want to start by saying that our organization values very much the lived experience of Albertans, and we listen very carefully to that experience. And I want to say that as a grandparent and as a caregiver to my 93-year-old mother, that we have experienced COVID along with the province, the many challenges and the impacts of social isolation through a very difficult period of my life. And so I offer my hope for a better future as we start to move into a better time. Social isolation existed before COVID. And it was a reality, certainly for many people with severe and persistent mental illness, and very much a reality for many seniors in our province. And I don't think we entirely thought through or understood how those informal supports that exist or the natural supports that exist in a community would be challenged through the ubiquitous experience of being asked to stay at home. Work at home, go out as little as possible, interact with as few people as possible. That works against the way that people have been set up to operate in their communities. It was interesting that the messaging that came very early in the pandemic from health and health services reflected some very common sense actions that I think will serve us well as we re-enter what will be a changed society, a changed normal. But one that maybe we've learned some good things during the period that we have been isolated. The first is we were encouraged to check in with our neighbors to make sure that we paid attention to what was going on around us in our neighborhoods and in our families and relationships, to stay in touch. Many of us had to adapt very quickly to new technologies, etc., which may have helped in reducing the impacts of being away from in-person contact. I can tell you my own story of my granddaughter on a Zoom call saying to me, "Grandpa, could you go down into the basement and use the camera on your phone?" She thinks I don't know how to use a cell phone. On the phone to show us our toys that are at your house. And that was the first time I really felt that full weight of being told, in order for us to be able to achieve what needs to be achieved in regards to the pandemic, there's going to be a cost to this. But checking in became a very normal part of our days. And now as we re-enter, we want to see, are people moving back to establishing or re-establishing valued relationships with family, friends, and neighbors? We were also, and I thought it was really interesting to be encouraged to use our common sense. And I think that seniors really have this hands down on a lot of other generations. Common sense was seen as a weapon, an approach to supporting neighbors, neighborhoods, seniors, caregivers, etc., through the time of anxiety and discomfort that was very, very real. And so the encouragement as we move into or out of the isolation that we've been experiencing is to make sure that we make our decisions we can acknowledge our discomfort, we can acknowledge our anxieties, but to ensure that we build our case for entering into society again based on what is real and proven and verifiable. There's a lot of information out there. We need to be careful, particularly around our mental health, when it comes to how to use that information. And I think one of the simple things is many of us think, well, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a clinician or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a clinical social worker, so I don't really want to talk about mental health. But the reality is we're talking about our mental health all the time. There is no health without mental health. And so, one of the things that we can use and engage, again, a very simple practice is just asking simple questions when we're interacting with the people that are giving us care, the people that work and provide care, or in fact, our family members who are seniors. A simple question, and then taking the time to listen. And rather than offering advice, there was lots of advice over the last 17 months, perhaps think about guiding the conversation towards allowing somebody to make a decision for themselves. It's very important to build that up again. When we've had what would be considered rights and freedoms in many cases removed for good reason and to support a greater cause, when it comes to recovery and moving forward out of this isolation, we want to make sure that people are making choices for themselves. And I'm going to have to wrap up, but I have a few other points. But I do want to say that during the pandemic and following the removal of restrictions, many of us will experience new feelings. I'm sure in the early days, as restrictions were coming in place, as isolation became a reality, that we experienced emotions and feelings that we weren't familiar with or didn't commonly engage with. We need to remember that while those things might look like mental illness in the moment, the reality is that for most, it is a mental health challenge, and there is a difference. A mental health challenge can ultimately resolve itself, maybe through helpful conversation or finding a resource to support, or maybe it's just simply, having a good sleep and facing the day in a different way. Mental illness does not repair itself, and in fact, it intensifies. And it impairs our ability to live a life that is flourishing and is without disruption. When we see a mental health concern or when we experience a mental health concern, it's very important that we take it seriously. We look at it, we evaluate it, or we have somebody work with us to evaluate it. Clinicians, neighbors, friends. I often say some of the best mental health work probably happens over a kitchen table between friends. But a mental health concern needs to be looked at, needs to be understood, and then watched. If it resolves itself, if through the support of others, we are not impaired by those feelings, those emotions that are strange to us, we can move on. If they persist, we should seek help. And there'll be lots of resources shared in this webinar in regards to seeking that help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was a great presentation. Our next panelist is Heather Rowland. Heather, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just a little bit of background on the context I'm speaking from. We, in fact, began our journey with senior social isolation about 5 years ago when, as part of the Edmonton Southside Primary Care Network, we started the Alberta Senior Centre Without Walls. And just like there is today, there were seniors out there who were experiencing isolation, and for a number of reasons. I wish we had a magic bullet that if we do this one thing, then, isolation will be done. We'll have solved it. But the truth is, isolation is an incredibly personal and a varied experience for each individual who is living with it at any age. And one of the maybe positive spins we can take on the pandemic, if we can take something positive away from it, is that we are now all infinitely more familiar with isolation as a concept. And, you know, when we talked about, well, how were we going to help with isolation back in the day, we settled on offering telephone-based programming for seniors. And this programming was incredibly varied to try and match a lot of the diversity and needs of our seniors population. We offered health and wellness information, both mental and physical health. We offered interesting speaker series, recreational programming, as well as just simple, friendly conversation opportunities for our seniors. And we really thought about accessibility. We wanted to help people who would experience barriers to accessing traditional programs, whatever those are. Whether it be a physical barrier of not being able to get out and go there because of mobility or transportation, but also maybe something around comfort and not wanting to go due to either experience the anxiety of going, the discomfort of leaving the house, anything was going to be an okay barrier for us to work around. And even as we look at our hyper-connected world nowadays, we still haven't moved away from the telephone. And one of the reasons that is that we don't want to leave people behind. We don't want to make it so that if you don't have a computer or an iPad and you don't have access to the internet, or you live in an area where a video call like this is just not, you don't have good enough internet for it, we still want you to be able to access this. And I think as we see the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to COVID, we want to remember that isolation does not just go away once things open up. For some people, absolutely. Once the senior centers open up, they are going to be there right, 2 hours before it opens the first day, ready to go. For others, this experience is going to stay with them. It is going to have to be a transition. There's work that's going to need to be done to get people feeling comfortable and confident enough to go out to opportunities in their community. And it's going to be important for us all to work together to identify those people who maybe are struggling a little bit more with the transition back and providing them options to help meet their needs where they're at and help with that connection. We always say finding a socially isolated senior is hard just in the definition of a socially isolated senior. And we have to take advantage of all those points of contact that are available to them. We have to work with their primary care physician, who might be the only care provider that they see. The home care staff who are going into their home, the Meals on Wheels volunteer who's noticing a decline, family and friends thinking about the people that you've lost contact with or you've noticed a severe decline in. We, of course, do get self-referrals to our program. We get referrals of all kinds, but I think it's important to have that opportunity and to really take on that responsibility at any level that, like David said, we're watching out for each other, we're checking in with one another, and we are ready to have some of those conversations around what someone's connection needs might be. I know there was a question, and I'll share a little bit about our program in the last 16 months. Obviously, we saw a huge growth. We saw our levels, both programming and participation, doubling over the last, pandemic operations, we'll call it. And one of the reasons we were able to do that was through partners, especially language partners. We were able to develop language-specific programming through partners. We were able to increase the number of offerings because up to about 50% of our programs are offered through guest speakers and partners who had ideas, had staff, had a dream, and were able to work with us to make it happen. We have also spread geographically. As you can see on the map there, we've spread and would like to continue to spread, because while a lot of folks will be returning their programming to normal, that doesn't mean that every senior in your community will be able to return to the programming as it will be run. And we'd love to work with communities to make sure that bridge programming, that accessible options are available to all seniors who may need it. We always wonder about measuring isolation. It's hard. There are a lot of papers out there about measuring isolation. There is a lot of research, and it can seem kind of overwhelming. I would like to direct people to a few different resources here. We personally, we were funded initially on grant funding, so of course we were looking for something that could measure impact of a program. And we actually read a lot of literature from the Campaign to End Loneliness in the UK. I would highly recommend they put out a report on measuring impact on loneliness in later life, where they go through the pros and cons and the benefits and downsides and all the rest, everything you need to know about the scales that have been validated and shown to be reliable. We ended up choosing one of those as our main measure, the UCLA Loneliness Scale. But it's not the only tool. And many of these tools, it depends on what your purpose is. Is it to show the impact of your program on someone's social connectedness? In our program, we ended up being able to track overall levels of loneliness coming into the program. And we found that during COVID, we saw a great increase in the number of people who were self-reporting as very lonely when they joined the program. About 67% of those when they first started self-identified as ranking very high on the UCLA Loneliness Scale. And we ended up seeing at the end, people don't really leave our program very often, but when we checked in with them again after usually about 4 to 6 months, we found that about 60% of our participants said that the program was helping, and it was reducing their feelings of loneliness, and they felt more connected. So we were looking for impact, but maybe you're looking for screening. You want help identifying when someone might be at risk for isolation. In that case, I would caution that screening is only as useful as the conversation you have to go with it. Are you going to be recommending support services? Just maybe, as David said, starting some of those difficult conversations. What's your goal? And I'd like to recommend a resource, Connecting Edmonton Seniors initiative out of the Pegasus grant a few years ago, came up with a little bit of a yes or no screening tool about risk of social isolation. Just to wrap up, I'm going to ask the questions, and maybe we can all ask ourselves about our own risk of isolation here. So, are you content with your friendships and relationships? Do you have enough people you feel comfortable asking for help? Are you as socially and physically active as you want to be? And do you have the resources that you need to do the things you'd like to do? With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Kessa and let us learn about the wonderful Rural Health, Mental Health Initiative.
Thanks very much, Heather. And I just wanted to point out for folks that we did post a link to the Connecting Edmonton Seniors, the Pegasus work that you referenced, as well as the campaign for loneliness, the UK study that you had referenced as well. So folks can find those links in the chat box. Our final panelist for today is Jessica Turowski, and so I will hand it over to Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm just going to share my slides here. Here we go. As mentioned, my name is Jessica Turowski, and I'm part of the Canadian Mental Health Association Alberta Division team, where, as Dave mentioned, we support community mental health by building capacity in communities and working to catalyze and ignite mental health movements. As the provincial branch, we use public health and other upstream approaches to make system-wide impacts to mental health. So this includes things like health promotion, community development, training, and advocacy. So we ourselves do not provide direct services, though we partner with many different service providers across the province to help leverage those efforts. And ultimately, we believe that it's really important, that there are elements of managing and treating mental illness that service providers can do that community members just can't, and that we also must acknowledge the elements of building and maintaining better mental health and well-being that communities can do that service providers cannot. So to support mentally healthy people and communities, the solution ultimately requires both experts and community leadership. So I lead the Rural Mental Health Project and Network, where our goal is to support rural and remote communities to build better mental health for all and work towards being mentally healthy communities. So this is not, a checklist defined by CMHA. Instead, our approach encourages people within rural communities to come together to define what does a mentally healthy community mean to us, given our own local priorities, history, and context, and how would we like to take steps forward together and with support from others. So to achieve our goal, we have 3 pillars of action. The first is training and funding. So we work with local community-based organizations to help us identify a community member who's interested in facilitating relationships and a local group to come together and take action. So these are the people that we're calling animators. So we provide that person with training and funding to support them to get started in their community. And where training gives them the mindset and the tools and connection to others to help discover more about their community, who's in it, and to build relationships so that a group of people that reflect the community can come together. They then facilitate those local action teams to learn and take action together in ways that support better mental health given their own local context. The second pillar is around our network. So learning happens before training and it happens after training. And the network is a space where animators and others can stay connected to one another, to share ideas about what they're learning, what they're doing, to draw inspiration from others, brainstorm, and collaborate around different challenges and opportunities as they emerge. And the network is really ultimately about leveraging what other provincial, regional, and local partners offer to help better connect rural communities with additional resources. And the final pillar that I'll just speak briefly about is community grants that we offer to further support animators and their communities along the implementation of those transformational ideas. So participating communities, just to speak briefly, so this is a map with all of the communities who've participated in training over the last 3 years. So it reflects 115 rural communities where 184 people have been trained from within those communities. This includes 20 plus people that are First Nations or living in Métis settlements. And that overall, as part of our network, we have over 600 network people involved, whether it's through subscriptions, being part of our online network, and other pieces like that. Through the network, we have 4 sort of major streams of activity where animators and others can continue to learn and further develop their local approaches. So first, we work in partnership where we invite different internal and external partners to share information out with others, whether that's around training, funding, programs, whatever it may be. Second, through the animator exchanges, we create time and space for animators to continue to learn and support and inspire one another. Really about that, that we can't do this on our own, and we get much further together. Third, we look to create as well as curate resources and ways for people to stay informed. So we do this through newsletters, weekly Hope emails, and by having videos and narratives where animators and communities can tell their stories, as well as different online spaces like our website and Facebook. And finally, but also most importantly, is around building connections. So our work continuously is looking to make connections across people and organizations, whether that's based on location or shared interests. Over this past year, we rolled out our grants to help support animators in their communities implement their local mental health action plans. This year, we're supporting 31 rural communities, and the pie chart here shows the different priority areas that those funds have supported. And if you'll note, the biggest portion of communities are focused on social connection, where it's a really common local priority that communities are tackling due to the isolation and loneliness that people have been experiencing. So I'd like to share some additional reflections around isolation and loneliness, as well as try to answer some of the questions that had been presented. So social isolation and loneliness, like rural mental health, are really complex issues, where there, as Heather had said, no single solution or silver bullet that will address loneliness for everyone in the province. Isolation can be imposed on people, like during a pandemic. It can be perceived, like, for example, feeling alone even when you're with others. And it can also be a consequence of multiple interacting factors, things like your age, gender, your mobility, your quality of hearing, distance from friends and family, access to transportation, social anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and so on. There's so many different factors that play into loneliness, whether that's perceived or real physical separation. And so as, building on what Heather had shared, to address loneliness, it can be really helpful to reframe our thinking around that complexity. So instead of looking for a single solution for everybody, like technology, for example, we can work together to take a deeper, more intentional look at the specific communities of people that we're looking to connect with and address loneliness. And this ultimately requires getting to know the people and their circumstances to understand what loneliness looks like in their lives, whether it be a hearing aid or access to transportation or food. Because ultimately together we can co-create solutions that are respectful and that listen to and validate people's experiences, their perspectives, and the contributions that they can also make in the community. Many rural communities are working to address social isolation in a variety of different ways, and I'd like to give some examples to help inspire you, perhaps. So before the pandemic, groups had been connecting directly seniors with youth to be able to have youth teach seniors different tech skills like using iPads or tablets, while the youth also benefited from having a mentor role and a relationship with a senior, where it created a healthy and reciprocating relationship for everyone involved. In Devon, in particular, there were men, women, and businesses that came together to help build standing garden beds for seniors' homes that also invited them to stay involved with the maintenance and the companionship in those communities. During the pandemic, there's obviously been a real shift, and communities have used more creative and safe approaches Like, for example, some communities were mailing out different art postcards that were made by children and mailing those to different seniors' homes so that they can see drawing and messages from different youth and children in the community. Some communities helped arrange phone calls with kids and other volunteers to be able to have connections, or dropping off food baskets to create together and take pictures of. Others did distance parades, window art, and those are just a few examples of the different ways that people have been looking to help sustain social connections so that we're staying physically distant but not socially distant. And those are all being led by and within communities. And these are methods that help create shared moments that are meaningful to seniors and to the other community members that are also involved. So one question that some folks had asked was about isolation and access to devices. And I believe that technology can be used in circumstances where people are comfortable with the use of technology, or if, for example, their family is really far away. And technology can be a wonderful, helpful tool. However, in conversations, I also suspect that technology won't be an approach that's helpful for everyone. And I think Heather spoke to that really beautifully. So it's really important to consider if there are other low or no tech solutions that people can access if access to technology isn't available, or if it's not preferred with the folks that you're working with. That being said, I also believe ultimately that broadband internet has become more of a basic need in people's lives. And so there's more work that we have to do together to make that happen and make it available and accessible for everybody as well. Another question somebody asked was around what support is available for people whose mental illness is affecting their daily function. And support for different individuals across the province will definitely look different depending on which community you're in. I would recommend beginning by looking at what clinical services are available in your in-person and online areas. And one way you can do this is to be able to connect with different local coalitions, committees, or wellness networks. Like, for example, reaching out to one of our animators, as many of them have done a lot of groundwork in putting together what assets and resources are available within that community and within that surrounding county or region that you can access. I would also really highly recommend considering what other non-clinical supports can be helpful. We really can't forget that social support is a protective factor, and it creates resilience that helps us overcome stress and challenges that we face, whether it's through a pandemic or transitioning into new housing or whatever it may be. So this includes really looking more at starting up, or being part of local support groups, whether those are online or in person. Looking at how family and friends are available to be involved in supporting, and also supporting their success, knowing that, family and friends can also be burnt out as caregivers. And also to consider other access points that can build social connections and natural supports. So these can be, culturally linked activities, things that are connected to sports and sporting groups, whether it's hockey, soccer, or what have you, and other networks based on interests. So we've learned a lot about men's sheds taking off, for different groups that are really wanting to do, working with their hands, different gardening groups. Because ultimately informal supports play an important role in the quality of our lives, whether we're living with a mental illness, with a disability, or not. And so there was one last question around screening that Heather had some really great tools, so I won't add to that. But again, thank you for having me, and hopefully this has been some helpful information and some considerations in your work that you do and in your lives.
Thanks very much, Jessica. And thank you to all of you for your great presentations. There was lots of really good information, and I certainly learned a lot. I think, Heather, the questions that you asked at the end of your presentation, how I would have answered those 16 months ago and how I answer them now are probably quite different. And I imagine that reflects our collective experience. So now we would like to open it up to questions and answers. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to ask any questions that you might have of our panelists. I'm going to start with a question that relates to motivating a senior. How can I motivate a senior who I think is socially isolated to connect and get out more into the community? And I will open it up to any of the panelists who may like to respond to that.
Ketha, I'll venture into that. I think that again, it's been reflected in the presentations that our drive to help has been there we go. Our drive to help has been enhanced through the COVID experience and trying to find new ways to help and to reach out. And as people are starting to consider reentry to the broader society, there's going to be hesitation, without a doubt. And I don't think that's going to be unique to seniors. It's going to be with everybody. And I think it really has to be a pacing thing and being helpful but not pushy in always offering. Would you like a ride to the grocery store? Would you like to go for coffee? Because we might feel discouraged that we're not getting the response that we're looking for. But as we reinforce that, as we show ourselves to be reliable and thoughtful and concerned, eventually I think that there's some reciprocity in that and folks will find their way. It can be concerning to watch somebody who was engaged more socially before withdraw. And so that might be something that would need to be explored either with a professional or through a conversation that's solution focused.
Mm-hmm. We get a lot of calls from concerned individuals or family members who say, my parents are going to love this, or my parents need this, or my friend needs this, my spouse needs this. And the very first thing we do as a program is we talk with the person to see where they are at. Like David said, sometimes they're not at a stage where it is going to be helpful for them. There may be something else that's needed to be addressed first before this happens. It may just be a lack of alignment between the thing we are suggesting and the person's interests. Their social level, how much energy they feel they have to engage with socialization. I think I can speak from my own experience. The pandemic has changed my acceptable level of socialization energy, and I've had to adapt accordingly. And so I think patience is a big component of it. There are many cases I can share from my professional experience where I thought I didn't get through to this person. I talked to them and they didn't want to do anything I suggested. And I said, that's fine. You know, we're here when you're ready. We'd love to have you. And thought I would never hear from them again. And then 2 months later, I get another phone call from them. And they're ready now. Or they want a little bit more information. Or they want to try something out. So sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's giving them space. And sometimes it's just listening to what gets them excited again. What's something that they really want to try that they've really missed? Maybe it is those coffee dates that you go out and take them out. Maybe it's walks. Maybe it's a game or learning something new. Trying to find that specific motivation for the individual.
Thanks, Heather and David, for your comments. I wanted to respond to a question that was in the chat box around turning cameras on, and just acknowledge that Heather is actually without video capability, so she's unable to turn her camera on. So it's not that she's ignoring your request. Just wanted to acknowledge that. Another question that has come in: are there any recommendations for program that help seniors with the soft skills needed to build relationships? In my practice, many seniors have stated that with the loss of their lifelong friends, they don't feel they have the skills to make new friends any longer. And again, I will open that up to all three panelists for comment.
I think I can speak to this in some respects that I'm not aware of a specific provincial program. Heather, her program is connected there. Within each rural community, there's usually different types of initiatives that people can access. So really getting to know what types of, whether they're driven by service providers or organizations, or if they're more grassroots opportunities. For example, Men's Shed. Most of the folks that are involved with men's sheds across the province are men that are older, being able to work on something and also build connections as sort of a result of working on other things. And so there's a variety of different locally grown, I don't even want to call programs, because they're locally grown initiatives out of people's passions and interests. And so I think looking to those spaces can be helpful, as sometimes the clinical world can be helpful for addressing the needs in order to get comfortable to be socially active. But when social activities happen, those usually happen in the community and away from clinicians. So, so just some thoughts to add.
Yeah, and from a programming level, we actually have offered a few series I would recommend. At the Recovery College for CMHA's Recovery College has a wonderful program called Conversations That Matter that our participants have said is very helpful in terms of reframing it to say, I'm going to get better at being a good conversationalist, or I'm going to get better at this interaction. And it's one of the first things we acknowledge with folks who are joining us is that social skills are like any other skill. If we get rusty, we lose some of that ability. And how do we get better? We practice. And so it's okay if we're struggling a little bit. It's okay to feel that discomfort and to say, I'm not good at this anymore. But it's just like riding a bike. If we fell down the first time and said, I'm not good at this, I'm going to stop, we'd never get to the end goal. And so I think that encouragement and recognizing as well that they're not alone in that situation. I think that's been really helpful for a lot of folks who have expressed that concern on our program, is that we can share with them. We hear this all the time from other participants. And the reason you are doing this programming is that you want to get more socially connected. You want to get better at this. And it's okay to make mistakes. We've got facilitators, we've got staff who can help kind of smooth some things over, but ultimately we're trying to get better.
And I think there's a shared experience now that we've all had. That often that's what we're looking for, is that bridge to build a relationship around. And while COVID hasn't been the most positive experience for many people, it's ubiquitous. So we have common ground. We have a story to tell, and everybody has an important story to tell about what they did and how they were impacted. And in fact, it's probably really good for people to be able to create environments where they can tell those stories, the good, the bad, and the challenges that were overcome. That's how resiliency is built.
Thank you to the panelists for those comments. Minister Pon, would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
No, I would like to ask a question. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the very informative presentations. I learned quite a bit from all of your presentation. But somehow I have a question. So regarding the ethnic community, because I said that, like myself, that is a Chinese, and quite often that mental illness, even though some senior or people have it in the ethnic community, in a multicultural community, but because of our culture, because of the language barrier, it seems it's going to help even harder to deal with this in the ethnic community. It is true. Even that's what you're finding. How are we going to address this issue with the people do not understand what's a mental health about and have a language barrier? To the panels. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think it's a very valid point. And stigma, while there's been great progress in Canada in broad strokes in reducing stigma around mental illness, in many groups, and it's not, it may be cultural groups, in many types of communities, small C communities, I guess I call them, stigma is alive and well, and that includes rural and remote communities in Alberta. And well, in the sense that it's, in some cases, it's very strong. And really, I think that when it comes to breaking down that stigma, it comes from something very similar to what Jessica is doing in the Rural Mental Health Project, the development of animators, of people from the community. The animators in the Rural Mental Health Project are chosen by the community, not by CMHA, not by any organization in particular. The communities choose them because they see them as champions, and that's really what has to happen, I think, to engage ethnocultural or identifiable or hidden communities in the reduction of stigma. So in broad strokes, yes, we're talking about mental health. Thank you, Bell, let's talk. But the actions to undo or to inform against a bias or cultural stigma, that has to come from the community. And that's where organizations like ours and others are there to support that building of knowledge and the right approach to opening the doors of understanding.
Yes, that's one of my absolute favorite parts about working with partners is that we don't assume that we know just because this works for one group that it's going to work for another group. And you know, being able to work with organizations as the Senior Centre Without Walls, we have Mandarin and Cantonese programming that's run by the Calgary Chinese Elderly Citizens Association, and they bring cultural knowledge, volunteers from that group, and really just that expertise that makes the programming accessible, appropriate, and effective. And if we were to step in and say, oh, we could run that, or this is, to everyone, it wouldn't have the same effect. Same with our Francophone programming from the Fédération pour Franco-Albertan Aînés. And it's such a beautiful opportunity for us to leverage community partners, experts from this community, and really center it around what the specific needs are and what's going to work and what can we try in this situation. So I look forward to all of the work that's happening at these different community levels, and I think it's a great chance for us to lift that up and to say how can we help support this culturally specific work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one last thought and building on Heather and Dave's comment, is the allies and influencers from within each community can be really helpful to, connect them with one another, and so that any sort of conversations that are happening within the community and any ideas that they have around things that could support better mental health will be a reflection of their own voice and autonomy. So one thing we've heard again from many different communities is parachuting in, telling people what to do and leaving has had its time and place in our history, but that there's a lot more movement and transformational change around mental health and well-being when people have an active role and a voice in that. And so with our approach, it's really looking about those allies and influencers within the community and supporting and propping and celebrating and supporting their voice because they're the ones that can connect with others and use language and concepts that are relatable and meaningful to the people within whichever community that may be.
Thank you very much, everyone. Unfortunately, I think we could probably stay online and have very enriching conversation, but we are nearing the close of the webinar for today. Just a few additional comments. I wanted to acknowledge there were a couple of other questions that came in the chat box. Just a question around men's sheds and whether there was any more information. All of the panelists' contact information will be posted in our last slide, so you can connect. I think, Jessica, it was you who had referenced men's sheds, so please follow up directly with Jessica if you'd like more information on that. And in addition, in response to the question around the soft skills for making friends, both SAGE in Edmonton and CARIA in Calgary have programming that are geared toward that specific skill. So please feel free to reach out to those organizations if you'd like to learn more. So finally, just want to thank everyone. It was a really great discussion. We're very grateful to Minister Pon for hosting this important series. And we want to thank all of our panelists today for an informative webinar. In the coming weeks, we do have 3 more webinars scheduled where we will be discussing the following topics. First, we'll be reestablishing social connections and overall well-being as we enter this new phase of reopening. Second will be strategies to manage grief and loss. And then finally, resources to support managing burnout and stress. Dates and registration information can be found on our webpage, the link to which has been posted or will be posted shortly in our chat. And we encourage all of you to register early. We will also be posting this webinar on our website for viewing after today's session. Upon exiting this webinar, there is a very short voluntary survey that you may choose to complete. The results of the survey will help to inform the development of future webinars. Thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope that everyone has able to take something from what we discussed today and that you all managed to stay cool. Thanks again so much, everybody.